The broadcast of the regular meeting of the Budget Committee will now begin.
Good morning. My name is Lene Palmisano. I'm the chair of the Budget Committee, and I'm going to call to order this regular committee meeting for Thursday, November 5th. Before we proceed, I will note for the record that this meeting has remote participation by council members and city staff as authorized under the provisions of Minnesota Open Meeting Law, Section 13D.021, due to the declared state of local public health emergency. At this time, I'll ask the clerk to call the roll.
Councilmember Reich.
Present.
Gordon. Cunningham.
Present.
Ellison. Osman. Goodman.
Present.
Jenkins.
Here.
Cano. Bender.
Here.
Schrader.
Here.
Johnson.
Here.
Fletcher.
Here.
Gordon. Ellison. Osman.
Here.
Cano. Chair Palmisano.
Present.
There are 10 members present.
Thank you. Let the record reflect we have a quorum. Today we will continue hearing presentations from city departments on the mayor's 2021 recommended budget. On the agenda this morning is the mayor's office, 311, communications, the Office of Emergency Management, and finally the city attorney's office. So I will let my colleagues know that, just as usual, if you'd like to speak, please put your name in the meeting chat with a comment or a question, and I'll call on you as soon as I think it makes sense. And we will begin today's presentations with the Mayor's Chief of Staff, Gia Vitale. Gia, are you here with us?
Good morning.
Welcome. Go ahead.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair Palmisano and council members. My name is Gia Vitale. I am Mayor Jacob Fry's Chief of Staff. Thank you for allowing me some time this morning to share an overview of the mayor's office budget. You can move to the next slide, please. This slide simply just illustrates that our entire budget comes out of the general fund, and our department is technically set up as one program in the budget book. You can actually skip ahead 2 slides. The next one's just a transition slide. Thank you. So to meet the 5% targeted budget cut for our department, which is roughly $115,000, we will maintain a vacancy for a policy aid position through 2021. You'll see on the second line of this table an allocation reduction that is a consistent adjustment across the enterprise. And then the final line here, the non-personnel adjustment you see in the table, is to right size the mayor's office budget to reach that targeted 5% reduction. With that, I'm happy to pause and see if there are any questions.
I'm not seeing any questions. Did you have more slides?
That is it. My final slide is a thank you slide. Our office budget is pretty simple.
All right. I will mention, as I just wait a few more seconds for my colleagues to see if they have any questions or comments for you, that I appreciate all the work of the mayor's office in putting this together. We do have a question or comment from Council Vice President Jenkins.
Thank you, Chair Palmisano and Ms. Vitale. Just curious, is that policy aid position, I mean, how long has it been vacant?
Chair Palmisano, Council Vice President, thanks for the question. That position has been vacant since February of this year. That was the position vacated by Jamie Makepeace in mid-February of 2020.
Mm-hmm. And so I know there's been a couple of other departures from the mayor's office. Are you intending to fill those positions?
Yes, Chair Palmisano, Council Vice President. We have 2 hiring waiver requests in queue for the 2 positions that are currently being vacated.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Schrader.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Ms. Vitelli. That was a pretty brief report. If you could go into elaborate a little bit more, what the mayor's office does, what the staff is, why you need the staff you have, because there has been kind of an increase of staff over the years, and kind of give a little more context to the budget request, that'd be helpful.
Sure. Thank you. Chair Palmisano, Council Member Schrader, thank you for the question. Our office has right now budgeted for 13 staff, and as I think many of you know, we have our office structured with an administrative team, a policy team, and a communications team. Excuse me. We have, as I mentioned, we have 1 vacancy right now that's been open since. And the majority of our budget is personnel budget. We have a pretty small discretionary budget for things like office supplies and things that many of you might expect in an office budget. But really managing the inquiries and policy and legislative things that come across the desk, that's the staffing level is feels appropriate right now. I think everybody in City Hall probably can attest to feeling like they're stretched pretty thin right now with the amount of things that are coming in. And so the 13-member staff that we have feels appropriate for what we need.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Ms. Vitale, for this presentation. This is more, this is a comment, just I think that's worthwhile naming. Things may feel stretched in the mayor's office, but there is quite a robust staff there. And like, we as a city council do not have a communications team. We have no communication support. In fact, we have to lean into our policy aides, our policy aide and council associate. I mean, I could speak for my ward, which I represent a ward that is majority people of color, concentrated area of concentrated poverty, and my staff spend, both of them, I would say like easily 75 to 80% of their time just on constituent services, because my ward is so high needs. The 5% cut between the electeds, between the mayor's office and the city council, they are not the same. One staff position versus our ability to be able to do any communications, to be able to do outreach and engagement. Again, I represent an area that has historically been disenfranchised from civic engagement. So to say that one staff position is like a staff position in comparison to our ability to do outreach and engagement, like those are not the same things. That 5% are, that's not the, like, just by numbers, sure, but like the impact of that is not the same. And so, I mean, the fact that there's a communications team in the mayor's office when we as a city council have no comm support, and I know that one of the positions open is a communications position, I just feel like there's opportunities for a more equitable sort of burden that we all have to carry if we are going to be expected as city council members to be able to do community engagement and outreach with predominantly, like for me, with predominantly people of color who have been historically disenfranchised. If I'm going to have to pay for that out of my own pocket, in order for that to happen, I just feel like we have to think about what does the 5% equitably, like, how does that actually impact? So I just needed to name that because of the fact that I just have some serious concerns about the impact that that has in terms of civic engagement for my community, the amount of impact, and the barriers that that potentially creates for Northside voice in our decision-making process. So just wanted to name that. Don't necessarily need a response. It wasn't a question, but if you feel inclined to, by all means, but just no pressure to respond. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think some of my colleagues' comments are kind of more generally speaking, things that we've been talking about in other department presentations, including our own. And I do feel we have a continued need to really act on these evaluations that are underway, especially in the area of communications and community engagement. The multiple crises affecting our city are exposing the strains in our system of community response and engagement, internal communications, and others. And I think we already knew there was room for improvement in those places. And, now even more so. Even a couple of years ago, I was in a meeting with Council Vice President and the city coordinator and the mayor, I think one of our leadership team meetings, and we were talking about what happens when there's a crisis, in particular a police-involved killing. And, I reflected that it's actually usually the city council member who coordinates public meetings. I noted, Councilmember Palmisano, that when you had this tragedy in Ward 13, that you actually did such a good job of convening these meetings, and which I was able to attend. But we really do lean on council offices to do a lot of that frontline community engagement. So I think, Ms. Vitale, what you're hearing is part of a conversation that we've been having about how to really define the different roles of our offices, as well as ensure we're communicating, and then understanding whose responsibility is to create content and communicate with the public. And this issue of council not having communication support is, becoming more and more difficult as the communications needs increase. I did want to note that I do, as well as the mayor, review the hiring freeze waivers. There are 2 pending for the mayor's office. One, the policy aide position, which is the position that was detailed to the health office that I think we want to fill very rapidly, and appreciate so much the mayor's partnership in quickly solving for the staffing issue related to public safety engagement. The other position is the communications position. And, I think given what we've been hearing in the discussion, not just now, but up until now, I think it's my intention to suggest that come through council for approval as part of the budget process, and as part of a bigger discussion about our communications capacity as a city and our kind of various roles in communicating. So I'm happy to have follow-up conversations with anyone about that. We have added 2 FTEs to the mayor's office since I have been in office. And then, Ms. Vitale, I also just did want to ask you, since we heard a little bit about the structure, is there a council liaison in the mayor's office, or is it tending to be more topically focused? I know since the emergency declaration was in place that you and Heidi have been working, you and Ms. Ritchie have been working closely with Deanna in my office to communicate with the council. It does feel like another area where I myself am often calling colleagues. I know my 2 staff take on a lot of extra council communications responsibilities. We've had various different ways of the coordinator's office briefing council members or not. So just kind of wanted to understand better how the mayor's office is structured in relationship to the council communications.
Thank you, Chair Palmisano, Council President Bender. To say we have one specific person that's designated as a council liaison in our office would not be accurate. I think it is often a case-by-case basis depending on what issue might be arising. I think you all have probably seen during moments where it's a maybe an urgent thing that needs to be communicated. You'll often hear from myself or Miss Ritchie in my office to communicate that information, or sometimes we share that burden with the mayor to quickly try and communicate out as best we can. I think you also will often see Peter Ebnett as somebody in our office because of his close coordination with the intergovernment relations team is often a person that is somebody who is asked to quickly communicate information to council members. And of course, the policy team in my office all cover different subject matters. And so depending on what that subject matter is, they certainly may be the person tasked out to communicate or understand something from one of your offices in relation to ours as well, or across the enterprise.
Thank you, and it's worth noting that Mayor Fry is very accessible, so I know he has a lot of direct conversations with council members himself as well. So thank you. The partnership between the mayor's office and the council is really important, so I think these thoughtful conversations are really valuable. Thank you, Ms. Vitale.
Thank you. I'm not seeing anybody else in queue. I do want to point out that the way that different public offices operate is very different, jurisdiction by jurisdiction. I believe that the county commissioners, for example, have a budget for their district that they pay for a lot of things out of, and with that comes a lot of different kinds of discretion over what kind of staffing they need. It's for city council, that is a lot more regimented or set out for us, right? We can hire up to 2 positions. They have very clear salary bands. They cannot go outside of those bands, and the additional amount of money that we have in award budget really doesn't allow for hiring anybody else per se, at least not on any sort of part-time basis or more. But it is notable, that other cities do this differently. In some larger cities, like in Chicago, for example, the aldermen have a field office, right? So part of being able to be seen as more accessible to the communities that they represent, they're able to have a physical presence of a space in their district or in their ward. And there's been different models of this, and I'm not sure that we have the right one at the city council level. A question that I have for the mayor's office and Ms. Vitale would be, could you help us understand the sheer volume of citywide constituent contact or the differences in responsibilities, right? Like, what kind of citywide constituent inquiries does your admin team get? I would imagine it's probably many multiples of what any of our ward offices get, which are burdened, but I'm just curious, could you speak to that a little bit?
Sure, Chair Palmisano, thanks for the question. I wish I could tell you off the top of my head what a daily, the daily incoming in is of information in the various platforms that we receive information, but an example, certainly today after the protests on 94, I know that our voicemail box is full and our inbox is flooded with messages, and I suspect a lot of the council members are as well. So, and I think we often feel a lot of outside of the city and outside of the state inquiries that come in. And so that is just additional information we have to suss through to make sure that we're effectively and quickly responding to our own constituents. I'd be happy to get back with an average, a daily, what it looks like on our voicemail and the email and such that comes in. But off the top of my head, I mean, it varies from anything you can imagine, like a right-of-way issue or a safety issue, and everything in between.
Yeah, I don't need data. I just was curious how it feels from that perspective. Another question I have is, with 2 staff on the communications team, can you help us understand the differences in responsibilities between the communications director position and the press secretary?
Sure. Chair Palmisano, the communications director position is, I think I would frame it as the more strategic thinker, setting the vision for the office. And traditionally what has happened with the, at least, in the 2.5 years I've been in this office, the communications, the press secretary position has managed a lot of the incoming information from reporters and inquiries from that respect. So, I think on a daily basis, I'm sure we get multiple requests per day from reporters, and that certainly ebbs and flows depending on the topic du jour that's happening in the city or across the state, or what's happening or how we are being seen internationally, of course, referencing back to May and June of this year. And so I would say the communications, the press secretary also has managed the social media accounts and worked with our communications, city communications, as it relates to the website, and also often does a lot of the advance or prep work when it relates to any media that we are doing, and often coordinates with council members and city department heads when we're doing things jointly.
Thank you. I'm not seeing anyone else here in queue, so thank you. Thank you for your presentation today. Colleagues, I will look to receive and file all of these at the end. So we will go ahead and move right along, slightly ahead of schedule here, to our 311 department overview. Do we have Director Glover on the line, or who do we have giving this presentation?
Madam Chair, Director Glover is here.
Welcome.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the council. My name is Trish Glover. I'm the Director of 311. I'm happy to present the mayor's 2020 recommended 2021 budget for 311. Next slide, please. As you can see, we're solely funded by the general fund. Next slide. And then these are some of our base cuts to be able to meet those percentages that we had. Next slide, please. So 311, my operations manager retired in December, so I have not filled that position. And so I'm going to hold off on filling that position until 2022, or when we do have revenue to do that, for a personnel cost of, or cut of 129. There's other fees that I was able to find through our budget to cut, such as I've completely cut training, travel, office supplies are very minimal. Well, actually, we don't have any right now, but I did set aside some money to buy new supplies when we move into the new building. But we were able to cut $5,000 from our advertising budget, $10,000 from IT, and some other miscellaneous funds to make these cuts that we needed to avoid layoffs. And I can stand for questions on this slide before we move on, if there are any. Okay.
I'm not seeing any, no.
All right, next. New investments, next slide. So 311, in order to make the addition, I'm sorry, this is an enterprise effort that was made by Councilmember Fletcher, had asked that 311 take the theft reports from MPD to help with some relief from MPD, so that people aren't having to call MPD to make these reports. They can make them through 311. Sorry. So most of the MPD theft reports will be moved to 311. Again, this is an enterprise-wide effort in support of the city's goal to transform and improve public safety for all residents. There are some theft reports that we cannot take, anything where weapons were involved or there's evidence that's left behind. In order for us to take the theft reports, which are approximately 7,400 additional reports, in addition to the 4,600 that we take already each year, we'll need an addition of 3 FTEs. As you're aware, Madam Chair, our training is 4 to 5 months. And so we're not going to, the hiring date is going to be January 4th. We decided to wait instead of just because of how long the process is. The new agents that are hired can take some police reports within 4 weeks of hiring, but they're not on the floor 100%. So they're still needed in training. So until these agents are trained, we're not going to be able to absorb those reports. And so that'll probably be around April. We'll also need to have some kind of education campaign for the public so that they know to call 311 and that we can take these reports for them now and that MPD will not be responding. Next. Actually, that's the end of my budget, so I can stand for questions if there are any.
Thank you. Just waiting a moment for people to step in with questions or comments. A comment from Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Chair Palmisano, and thank you for taking on the theft reporting. I think this is a really important way that we can shift with a more appropriate response for this kind of call, and so I think this is really a positive step. One question that people have had and that I have is, can you just remind us what the hours of operation are for 311? And I know that we made some changes to weekend and evening availability in the past few years, and I'd be interested in thinking about whether, as we shift more responsibilities to 311, if we also need to think about hours and if you've thought about what the cost associated would be.
Sure. Madam Chair, Councilmember Fletcher. Currently our hours are Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Last year in August, we cut down on weekends due to staffing levels. In order for us to take on more work, I mean, there are some other things that we can take on, and to be able to open on weekends is going to have to be an increase in our staffing levels again, because we have to be able to staff for the weekends. And so depending on the work that we take on would depend on how many more staffing that we need. But there is I think in order for us to open up on weekends again, we would need 3 to 4 additional staff to be able to meet those hours because of the different shifts during the day. I can get back to you on the exact number on those. I don't have that handy right now. Also, no, I think, did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Director Glover, I know there were a number of considerations that we weighed the pros and cons when removing the 311 service on the weekends. And one of them was really about staff and staffing and their welfare and being able to continue to attract and retain employees whose other options for work include things that don't require working weekends regularly. And so I'm just curious if to hire positions to work on the weekends, how would that change the overall work schedule of the environment that you're in? Would that make big changes to your staffing model? Would you be hiring people that that would choose to or want or wish to work weekend hours versus call center shifts that are more standard Monday through Friday? Can you just help us understand that consideration? Because it's a big one.
Chair Palmisano, sure. Being open Monday through Friday is a draw for sure, and it's an attraction for 311. This last hiring round that we're in right now, we had over 800 applicants apply. And then we, whittled it down to, after testing and everything, to about 120 that I've been going through to find for interviews. When we have to staff on weekends, obviously we have to staff up, and because we're a union environment, everything is done by seniority. So that means that the new people will always work the weekends. They'll always work the late shifts. I've found in my almost 5 years here in my previous call center experience that, seniority-based people get stuck on the weekends, for lack of a better word, and they, for a very long time. So unless we're continuously hiring, which we have not done for, a long time, our attrition rate's pretty low right now. Those people that are last to be hired will stay on the weekend shifts and the later hours. And they tend to get burned out, or they think that, it's just going to be for a temporary time. But when it gets to be a couple of years, and they get worn out working those shifts and not spending time with their families. And so it's not something, we do have shift bids twice a year. And so then you can bid a different shift, but again, it goes on seniority. So unless somebody was senior wants different hours for what reasons, they won't be able to move up in the shifts.
Thank you. And I just wanted to appreciate not only the very skilled work that 311 does to navigate for residents of the city for any question they might have, but to also acknowledge that our 311 call takers are often on the very front lines of people who are extremely frustrated, and they receive the brunt of a lot of really difficult calls. And sometimes they're able to route people accordingly to our council offices, where maybe we can be of some level of assistance differently than they are. But I just wanted to say for you and your staff that we know and we greatly appreciate how you are serving the city, and the friendly face that you provide when people don't know much about how to start navigating or to send their frustration somewhere, but they know that they could call 311. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll pass that on to my staff.
I'm not seeing any further questions or comments, so thank you for joining us today.
You're welcome.
And we will receive and file your appointment, or this presentation later.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
And we're going to move on and change over here to the communications department. Do we have Director Bergstrom on the line?
Good morning. Yes, Chair Palmisano, Greta Bergstrom here.
Welcome. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chair Palmisano, council members. I appreciate the time this morning to present our 2021 budget recommendation. My name is Greta Bergstrom. I'm the director of the city's communications department, and here today to present Mayor Fry's 2021 budget for our department. You can move to the next slide, the summary chart. The mayor is recommending a total department budget of $2,406,000 for 2021. These are all general fund dollars. And our budget for the department is broken into two program areas. The first and biggest portion being enterprise communications at $1.933 million, and the second being public access TV, which are pass-through dollars through an annual contract awarded actually this year to Be Fresh Productions for public access TV services, and that's in the amount of $472,000. And you can move 2 slides forward. Thank you. Moving into the recommended base cuts that Mayor Fry has set forward. The first on personnel impacts. We have a communications specialist that is retiring at the end of this year, December 31st. And so we will be holding that FTE position open for 2021. I'm happy to report that we would not be in a position to lay anyone off in our department, which is very, very important to us from a staff perspective and from a capacity perspective. In terms of non-personnel impacts, there is a $12,126 reduction. We have phased out our media monitoring services, the contracts for meltwater and TVIs. Important to note that the communications specialist who managed those services, those contracts through our enterprise news clips is actually the staff member that's retiring, and so those two reductions really work hand in hand together. And then of course there's a 6% allocation cut, which is being implemented like other departments across the enterprise. You can move to the next slide. Public access TV, here there is no change. The funding of $472,000 will remain level as it was this year. And again, that's ongoing funding for Be Fresh Productions to operate our public access TV. You can move to the next slide on new investments. Next slide over. So we have two change items that the mayor is recommending. It's important to say that both changes are shifting one-time funding to ongoing funding. The first is for cultural radio programming. So we have had $50,000 in ongoing funding recommended, and this would be to maintain our programming, the city's radio programming on La Raza, KMOJ, KALY, and WIXK Hmong radio programs. We do have the programs on KMOJ, Spanish language radio La Raza is every other week. On Hmong radio and Somali American radio, it is one program per month. And then we do have 2 programs per month on KMOJ, and so that's what that funding would be for. And I would just like to say that we've heard a lot from community, especially this year, in particular, saying that these programs are really their trusted sources of information, specifically in language information, culturally relevant programming topics. Obviously, it goes without saying we've had a challenging year as a city. And so in explaining COVID information, health information to our cultural communities, information about public safety, community safety in the wake of civil unrest, and then as our city is rebuilding and really struggling through the year, we have had an enormous benefit, I think, from these cultural radio programs in really a singular way of communicating and really communicating effectively. And we have heard back from community that they do find these programs to be a very valuable and trusted source of information. The second change item is, again, moving previous one-time funding into ongoing funding in the amount of $30,000 to support our video production and government broadcasts. So this is monies that would be spent on equipment and service maintenance contracts to make sure that broadcasts like these, now in a virtual environment, are able to be maintained appropriately should something break down or need fixing. I do want to say also that we have had just an amazing team working together this year, especially ever since COVID. Our video services team of 4 in our office has partnered seamlessly really with staff in the city clerk's office and with IT, as well as we've brought in 3 video staffers from the Minneapolis Convention Center to augment the work. To date this year, the team has broadcast 245 live government meetings like these, and 181 of these were actually virtual broadcasts, which was no small feat in the early going of converting from live in-chamber meetings broadcasts to the virtual meetings that we have. So I just would like to give a shout out to that virtual tech team. They have done an amazing job. They're doing the work right now, and we're really fortunate to have these staff on hand. You can move to the next slide. That is all I have for this morning, and would be happy to stand for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Director. As I wait to see if there are any questions or comments from my colleagues, I'll just mention that, of course, the maintenance work needed at City Hall would be drilling outside your window as you start presenting and broadcasting to the public. You did a great job just being nonplussed by it. Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the presentation. I was going to ask for just a quick update on how things are going with the move of the PIO role over to communications. I know it's pretty fresh. I believe that happened right at the start of October, but Certainly, there were some external concerns about that move, and was curious if you had an update just on how things are going.
Sure, happy to provide that update, Councilmember Chair Palmisano, Councilmember Johnson. That is correct. 2 positions, 2 FTE positions from the Minneapolis Police Department's PIO department were moved to our communications department as of October 1st. Those 2 staff did move over, have been now embedded in our department virtually. One staffer is communications and video coordinator position, and so is working under our video services team, spending the majority of her time on police video productions, but also spending time on enterprise work for other departments. And so we've been able to blend that position into our department. And then, of course, the police PIO position also moved over. That position has moved, it basically has been continuing the same role of frontline police PIO work, reporting to me directly, but working very closely, as I do also, with Chief Arredondo. And so I believe that has gone well. We have been working with our media partners in making sure that we have transparent flow of information and that we are covering the work. It is a daunting amount of work. I will not be able to say otherwise. It's long hours of doing the work, but I believe it has been going well and would be happy to take any other questions on this particular subject. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate the update.
Director Bergstrom, as we see if there's any other questions or comments, I'll put myself in queue just to say, does that mean that the work of the PIO, then all of that weekend work and overnight work operates differently? Is it now shared by every member of your team? Or help me understand that. I'm led to believe, though I don't know if this is the case, that the PIO position needs and has access to police kinds of data reports and such that maybe isn't given to every communications staff on your team. But I am especially concerned by the overwork, the 24/7 schedule of a PIO position. So I thought that one of the potential benefits of putting it in a bigger department was more of a shared workload. Could you help me understand that?
Sure. There has been some shared workload, but we're not staffed to cover the overnight work and the weekend work with the existing communication staff who have quite full plates as it is. So what we have been doing, and there have of course been furloughs and vacation days with the police PIO as well. And so on those, we have been covering that work during the day into the early evenings, and then some on-call work over the weekend. But overnight has not, we are not, our other staff are not on the scene police PIOs. They're not trained to do that work and to be on the scene. And so that work it waits until the next morning. I will say that for the most part, the police PIO, John Elder, who is in that position, has been covering the lion's share of the work. And so he is really, he is stretched. And so there is just a heavy workload there that we have been able to share some things, of course, taking work during the day, early evenings, and some workload and requests over the weekends. But then he is really covering the overnight work.
Yeah, so I heard you say that all the overnight and weekend work for police remains on one FTE in your department, and I think that's just a difficult position. Councilmember Jenkins.
Thank you, Chair Palmisano and Ms. Bergstrom, for this report. I'm curious if in fact those responsibilities are being shared throughout the department, and I know it's only been a month or so since its inception, but have you seen any confusion with media around who they should be contacting, or have we been able to just communicate what those processes are and who is sort of, filling in when the PIO is not available? I mean, I know that communication loop needs to be pretty solid. So I'm just curious, how is that progressing at this point?
Sure. Thank you, Chair Palmisano and Council Vice President Jenkins, for that question. We do have a very close working team, and so our media relations coordinators in our department work very closely with the police PIO. Yes, we have phone calls do roll over from our police PIO over to our media relations coordinators when he is on vacation or on furlough, or at times where he is unable to handle the workload. And so they are working very closely together. We do and have in the past work with police beat reporters, of course, on various issues. So they are all familiar with our communications, media relations staff in our department, and we're prior to this move, and that has continued. And so we have open lines of communications. If they're not able to reach one, they will try to reach the other, and I think have been largely successful in that capacity.
Madam Chair, if I may, so you're not seeing much of a lag in that area?
Yeah, I'm not yet. It has, as you mentioned, only been a little over a month, but we have been able to manage through that so far. But again, I will stress, I think the most acute challenges come in the late night, overnight, and or to some degree weekends, but again, especially late night and overnight situations, which again, the police PIO is handling the vast majority of that work, unless on furlough or vacation.
Thank you, Ms. Bertram.
Thank you. I'm not seeing other questions or comments at this time, so thank you, Director, for your time and for your presentation today.
Thank you.
And we will continue on. So moving over to the Office of Emergency Management overview, we'll be hearing from Director Barrett Lane. Director Lane, welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Pleased to have the opportunity today to present the Mayor's 2021 budget to the committee. We have just a couple slides that we'll go through here very quickly. Just to provide some background grounding, as you know, the Office of Emergency Management is in the resilience business. Our vision is one of a resilient City of Minneapolis organization, enterprise, if you will, serving a resilient City of Minneapolis community. And we do that by building out standard-based capabilities in 4 main mission areas, and that is prevention, mitigation, response, preparedness, and recovery. And obviously, we spent a lot of time this year in the response and recovery modes, and we really, just as I have your some time with you, to say thank you to all the support that we've received from the mayor, the council, and across the enterprises. We've been working with the community across these various mission areas. So with that, Madam Chair, if I could have the slide advanced, you can see that we are only partially grant or general funded. We're partially grant funded, about 44% grant funded. The rest is general fund, and we have 1 program that encompasses those 5 main mission areas that I just described. If you could advance the slide 2, please. For next year, based on the mayor's recommendation here, we will be enacting a cut to the general fund part of our budget here. We're eliminating one position, and we are eliminating a software package that we use to launch the continuity of operations program. But at this point in time, we figure we can maintain that without the benefit of the software package. So in order to meet our target cut, we're going to be making those two changes. And then there's also some additional adjustments that finance has made to our base funding model that's represented in that allocation strategy line. That's the second line on that chart. We have no other change items next year for 2021, Madam Chair, and with that, I will return it to you and stand for any questions.
Thank you, Director, for being the briefest of all of the departments. I know you're. I know well how efficiently you communicate and how succinctly. It's also difficult, given this budget year, to take an office that has been so active for so many parts of our summer and look to need to cut positions within it. Council Vice President Jenkins.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Mr. Lane. I don't know, the mayor's budget report was pretty brief as well, but there were some follow-up questions, so it may be a tie for the briefest. However, my question and comment is, maybe can you give us a little bit of an update on, I know you have said that our emergency management plans have to be updated every 4 years, and I think we are in that cycle now. Can you just give us a bit of an update on how race equity is managing to be incorporated in this new planning process? And again, I absolutely recognize all of the upheaval and challenge that every department has, but maybe none more so than the Office of Emergency Management. But wanted to get a brief update if that work is begun or where it is in the process.
Madam Chair, Council Vice President, happy to provide that update. Our planning section chief, Lori Burns, has been reaching out to Joy Marsh and her operations within race and equity to make those connections and to start building out that process for next year. So our plan is to bring that process forward, or that new document forward, for council approval next year. And I believe that Ms. Burns has also reached out to your office and to you to talk about what your vision would be, so we can make sure that we can incorporate that as well. So I would say that we're in the beginning phases of that. Obviously, with the election and some of the other things that we're closing out this year, the planning, the plan writing part of this is going to be moved into next year by and large. But I would say that we've made a good solid start on that. We've made connections with the enterprise parts of the parts of the enterprise that has that subject matter expertise that we need to bring to bear on that particular issue. And I do think that it's an important thing to include in this part of the overall planning process, even from a FEMA perspective, and I shouldn't say even from a FEMA perspective, but from a national perspective, a whole community approach is what's needed in these documents. And I don't think that there's a more important part of that whole community approach than that race equity lens that we want to bring to this work. So we're committed to doing that, and we will see what staff can bring forward. And I will be pleased to be sharing that with the council and the mayor's office next year when we bring that new document forward. Does that answer your question?
No, thank you, Director Lane. That really does. And I'm really happy to hear that even FEMA is, supporting this, these kinds of updates and inclusions of community. I mean, as we continue to move forward, I think, well, yeah, some of our challenges will be from a race-based perspective, but you know, thinking about the coronavirus, which certainly impacts humanity across the entire globe, but we understand now that, you know, there are significant additional impacts on communities of color, particularly Black and brown folks. So to the extent that we can be prepared in our responses with that level of understanding and awareness, I think it will help us to be more responsive to our broadest level of community moving forward. So I'm really pleased to hear that work is moving forward, and look forward to that document coming forward next year. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm not seeing other questions or comments from my colleagues at this time, so thank you, Director Lane, for your time today.
Madam Chair, thank you, and I thank the council as well for their consideration of the budget.
Yep. Thank you. We will turn now, last but not least, to our City Attorney's Office. Colleagues, I'll ask if our City Attorney, Mr. Rauter, is on and with us and ready to present.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Can you hear me?
Good morning. Yes, we can. Welcome and go ahead.
Yeah, I'm assuming there might be some rookie hazing in this, and that this is, I think, 10 weeks on the job, my first budget presentation. But I'm excited to have this opportunity. I'm certainly excited to be in this new role. As you all know, the City Attorney's Office is divided into two programs, criminal and civil divisions. The civil division is, as you'll see from the slide here, if you could move ahead, is funded out of the self-insurance fund, which I'll explain in a second, and the criminal division is funded out of the general fund with a few small grant funded portions. The civil division is divided into two types of services: client services and litigation. Client services provides legal services and advice to policymakers and departments, and the litigators defend the city when lawsuits are filed. The criminal division prosecutes gross misdemeanors and below that occur within the city of Minneapolis, and is divided into 5 teams: the charging team, community attorneys, and, as I'll get into in a couple of slides, 3 trial teams. Back to the funding issue. There are basically 4 different types of funds for our department. On the civil side, talking about the self-insurance fund, where we allocate costs to other departments that in turn drive our costs, and we use an actuary to help us project and allocate those department cost drivers. So essentially, revenue from taxes that go into the general fund, and eventually the general fund departments are charged for legal services, and this in turn creates the self-insurance fund for the civil division. On the criminal side, most of the funding is through the general fund, which is directly revenue directly from the taxpayers. We do have some grants, one of which is the downtown improvement grant, which is local. We also have 3 different federal grants in different areas, such as funding a victim witness specialist. It's another program involved with violence against women. And we also have a justice assistance grant, which funds 1 community attorney for us. Next slide, please. And 1 more. So now I'll get into the details of the cuts we are planning for the next budget year. On the criminal side, we are going to freeze the hiring of 1 paralegal position, 1 case investigator, 1 legal support specialist, and 1 assistant attorney 1, as well as some paid law clerks. The impact I'd like to talk a little bit about of those cuts, particularly the assistant attorney 1. We average about 15,000 cases a year that must be charged and prosecuted. So this puts a larger caseload on every prosecutor within the team. Paid law clerks provide a valuable service too, and they're able to assist attorneys in the courtroom and speed large court calendars up for all involved, and this again will just increase the workload on the attorneys on the criminal side. One of the things that we are implementing in order to help with the impact of losing this attorney, as well as the law clerk help, is as well as dealing with the additional potential for furlough days and budgetary constraints down the road. We're reorganizing the criminal division attorneys and into 3 trial teams. We used to have 2 trial teams and then a separate team focused only on domestic assault cases. Going forward, we'll have 3 equal trial teams with each member of all 3 teams handling all types of cases, including domestic assault. This is not uncommon, by the way. Many of the local government prosecution offices do not separate domestics from the rest of the types of cases, and I think this will make our criminal side with regard to the attorneys more versatile across the board with regard to being able to handle all types of cases, and it will also give all the attorneys better expertise in the important area of domestic assault cases. With regard to non-personnel impacts, the major savings that we're seeing there, since 2012, we've seen a 69% decrease in the use of the workhouse for Minneapolis cases. This, along with a renegotiated contract, has created savings that we have used to fund diversion programs, like the gross misdemeanor weapons offenses diversion program with Urban Ventures. However, due to COVID-19 and the increase of use of electronic home monitoring devices, expenses have even further decreased. So we will continue to watch the trend in this expense item, but we anticipate this remaining low for much of 2021, allowing us to reduce our budget for this item, at least for this year. Next slide, please. Now to our base cuts for the civil side. We're going to freeze the hiring of 1 assistant attorney 3, as well as 1 legal support specialist, and again, paid law clerks. As you all know, we continue to receive high-profile cases over the events of the past 6 months, and we're being asked to research and analyze even a lot more policies in terms of giving advice to policymakers. Not being able to hire an additional assistant attorney here on the civil side or have the law clerk help will mean lawyers will have several high-profile cases to manage at once, and will have to do more of the legal research themselves. And additionally, without the support of the legal support specialist position, paralegals and attorneys will be taking on more legal administrative work as they work on many high-profile cases and policy decisions. We don't have a lot in our budget here on the civil side beyond personnel costs, but there are a few listed there where we will have an unspent balance from an ongoing contract that we have for legal research, which is mostly online, some administrative costs for training and supplies. And finally, one of the creative things that the team was able to do was save some money by taking one of the positions cut from the criminal side, which was at a higher level, and using it to fill a lower level assistant attorney position on the civil side. And so we got savings there in excess of $17,000. Next slide, please. One more. We do have one ask in the new investment, and it's really in support of some criminal justice reform work efforts that we're very excited to be a part of. As you know, the city attorney's office has many different diversion programs, and for most of those programs, the individual must pay a participation fee, usually between $50 and $150. But the problem is that the ability to pay can be a barrier to many in deciding whether to accept the offer of diversion. The importance of diversion is that it allows us to have a resolution to the case, and it often keeps the conviction off the individual's record. To reduce racial and economic disparities, the city attorney's office is asking for this money so that we may offer these programs free to the individual. So it's important to understand we want to get to the point where we can offer these programs at no cost to the participants. And ideally, we'd like them to be offered free to all qualified individuals. And in a minimum, we would like to offer them free to anyone who qualifies for a public defender. The problem, though, with limiting payment to those who qualify for a public defender is that when we offer diversion pre-charge, a person has not yet been screened for public defender eligibility. So by offering diversion pre-charge and free, we're not only keeping the offense off the person's record, but we're hoping to increase the accessibility to the program. And to underscore why that's so important, some data for context. In 2019, of the African-American defendants who were offered diversion, 29% accepted, while 50% of white defendants who were offered diversion accepted the program. And it's also significantly lower for Native Americans who only accepted at an 8% rate. So while the cost of diversion isn't the only factor leading people to decline to participate in one of our programs, reducing the barrier of the participation fee may increase participation overall, and especially for those with economic inequities. That right now is the end of our presentation on the budget for 2021, and certainly would be willing to stand for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rauter. I'll go ahead and call on Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to express my gratitude for the consistent leadership in the City Attorney's Office with finding where there are disparities and addressing that, bringing forward innovative approaches and thoughts around how to address racial disparities, how to be able to engage in early interventions in very effective ways, very forward thinking. And so I'm very grateful to see the budget request item that has come forward. When I saw those numbers, I was very surprised to see that, and I appreciate deeply so the transparency around, you know, hey, we created this space, and then now we have found other barriers, and these are the disparate outcomes that we're getting, but we have a solution to be able to get to that. And so I'm just very appreciative, very impressed, and wanted to express my support to you all for continuously helping us think through how do we address the disparities that we see in our criminal justice system from the avenues that we are able to at the city level. So thank you for that.
Mr. Rauter, you're speaking, but we see you speaking, but you're on mute.
I apologize. I just wanted to say thank you for those comments, Councilmember Cunningham, and I wanted to note that I certainly share those values and those and focusing on this issue, these types of issues, as you've probably heard before. But I do want to give some credit to Deputy City Attorney Mary Ellen Hang, who I believe is on the line with us. The first conversation we had after my nomination was announced, she really impressed upon me that she and her team had a keen focus on this and some other areas related to race and equity disparities. So she really does deserve a lot of credit. I just am excited to work with her team to further explore how we can build upon that. So thanks.
Indeed. Council President Bender.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I also wanted to just thank you for bringing forward that particular recommendation and just encourage, I think, future innovation in this space. This part of the criminal justice process, I think, receives, at least in Minneapolis, less attention than the police specific side, but it is so important to our work to really support our community and to match the right resources to the problem in front of us. And I think part of the challenge is that our budgets, the costs don't fully kind of line up, right? So that we're in a continuum of city to county in terms of frontline response, and then resources, and then incarceration, or the sort of different pathways that happen. But I think there are so many potential cost efficiencies across that system. I think there's clearly so many ways that we can work better with the county to, match resources to people who are in need of them as we're interacting with the public through the system. So I think, the example of the dozen or so young people, very, very young people who are participating in the carjackings over and over and over again, it just highlights these breaks in our system where we're not seeming to be able to intervene in the lives of these children and families, but also not able to stop the harmful behaviors in our community. And I think this piece of that work is so critical. And I think, again, there's more we can do to build on these partnerships that we have to match the resources that we're creating as far as jobs creation programs or housing resources, to really match those to the folks that are coming through our system in this way. So anyway, just wanted to appreciate the work and just comment that I think there is likely much more to do in the future, and appreciate the fresh set of eyes and fresh perspective that you bring to this work, Mr. Rauter, and your small but mighty team doing this work.
Thank you, Council President. I appreciate that.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any other questions or comments in the queue here. So Mr. Rauter, welcome. You've been here only a very brief time, and it feels like you have a grasp on where this department is headed, and in making difficult choices in it, and working to innovate it as well. So thank you for all of this effort. Colleagues, that concludes the presentations for this morning. So I will mention that we will receive and file all of these departmental budget presentations, that of the Mayor's Office, 311 Communications, the Office of Emergency Management, and the City Attorney's Office. Seeing no further business before us today, I will adjourn this meeting. Thank you for being here. Take care.